Welcome back to the Last Days Book Club, where we are reading the book It Must Have Been an Angel by Marjorie Lewis Lloyd. This book is a collection of true stories related by persons who had angelic encounters, as well as other providential tales of divine interventions compiled from various Christian publications. In our last reading, we covered chapters 7 and 8, where we learned how angels often come to us in a voice, often a voice of urgency, so that we hesitate not, since danger waits on no one. As in the case of Pastor John, who heard a voice commanding him not to enter the brand new plane, which indeed crashed upon takeoff, killing everyone on board. Or Peter Marshall, who heard his name called in such an urgent manner that he stopped dead in his tracks in the blackness of the dark night on the Scottish plains, and was saved from plummeting to his death in an abandoned quarry. And there was Pastor Lloyd Wyman's father, who was told by an unseen voice to immediately light his lantern while traveling by night in Burma, just in time to see a man-eating tiger in his path, which fled at the appearance of the light. We also learned that angels can use animals and even insects as stand-ins when necessary, such as the spider which wove a web over the opening of a kiln so that Johannes Brenz would not be found in Stuttgart during the days of the Reformation, or of the intimidating British bulldog which accompanied Bob Sherman and stood guard as he did his colporteuring service in a neighborhood of many vicious dogs, or of Brownie, the mangy, smelly dog, which was terrified of indoors, but remained inside, despite many attempts to get him out, when a robber had sneaked into and hid in the pastor's basement, while his wife locked up the house and retired for the night. And God also uses brave men as stand-ins for angels, such as the hero of the Chinese rice fields, who lived on a hill and burnt his harvested crop to save the farmers below him, who were in danger of being engulfed by a tidal wave. We continue our reading today with chapter 9, entitled Replay. Bible times were exciting times. Miracles everywhere. Angels scurrying about, always appearing just at the right time, ready to push over Jericho's walls, or lead Peter out of prison, or make a way for Jesus through an angry mob. Elijah fed by ravens, his prayer turning off the rain, the fiery furnace, the lion's den. What a time to live! So when the scriptures were finished, angels were tired and began to take it easy. Miracles were put on the shelf. Prayers were stacked up and neglected. God can't do for us what he did for the people back there. Is that the way it was? And is? Don't ever think of it. The Lord's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, neither his ear heavy that it cannot hear. Isaiah 59 and verse 1. And Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Hebrews 13 and verse 8. We have already seen that God still has ravens and dogs and hens and spiders that do his bidding. Even as you read these words, God is hearing prayers and answering them in ways as spectacular as in the days of Elijah. And before you finish these pages, you will read a modern variation of the fiery furnace story that will take your breath away. The truth is that God and his angels are ready with a replay of the miracles of Bible times whenever and wherever they are needed. Says the Lord's servant, all that Christ received from God, we too may have. Then ask and receive. With the persevering faith of Jacob, with the unyielding persistence of Elijah, claim for yourself all that God has promised. But you say, Elijah was a great man. I can't expect God to do for me what he did for Elijah. I'm just an ordinary person. Yes, Elijah was a great man when he was guided and strengthened and controlled by the power of God. He was a great man atop Mount Carmel. But only hours later, when he withdrew his hand from the hand of God, he was very, very ordinary, fleeing in fear from Jezebel's threats, dejected, depressed, wanting to die. Elijah was a man, subject to like passions as we are, and he prayed earnestly that it might not rain. And it rained not on the earth by the space of 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth brought forth her fruit. James chapter 5, verses 17 and 18. God's promises are for us. His miracles are for us. His angels are watching over us. Every one of us. You and me. Listen to these words from the servant of the Lord. When in faith we take hold of his strength, he will change, wonderfully change the most hopeless, discouraging outlook. He will do this for the glory of his name. Living faith in the Redeemer will smooth the sea of life and will deliver us from danger in the way that he knows to be best. Nothing can stand in his way. His power is absolute, and it is the pledge of the sure fulfillment of his promises to his people. He has means for the removal of every difficulty, that those who serve him and respect the means he employs may be delivered. These stories of angel activity are not brought together to entertain you. They are to strengthen your faith. They are to deepen your conviction that with God, all things are possible. We are tempted sometimes to think that Jesus had an advantage over us, that he could live as he lived because of who he was. He was divine. He had powers that we do not have. He could do things that we could not do. But inspiration tells us Jesus revealed no qualities and exercised no powers that men may not have through faith in him. Jesus could walk through an angry mob and disappear. We can't do that. But angels led John Wesley through an angry mob. They did the same for Dr. Adam Clarke, author of Clarke's Commentary. An angel led James White through an angry mob. These men were great leaders, you say. Yes, but listen to this contemporary incident involving an Adventist minister, his wife, and a young Jewish girl who had become interested in the Adventist faith. As the two ladies were distributing literature, a husky agitator began a loud tirade of verbal abuse. The Adventist minister, sensing danger, confronted the agitator, who said, "Who are you?" "I am her husband," he replied. Listen as the pastor's wife tells it. Then all fury broke loose. Satan seemed to have full control of the man. In his rage, he began pummeling my husband, and at the same time yelling at the top of his voice. For the first time, I realized the seriousness of the situation. In my distress, Despite the fact that I was pressed on every side by Jewish people, I lifted my voice to heaven and audibly called, "Jesus, help us." As I did this, something impelled me to look back, where, to my great astonishment, I saw an empty lane leading to the road, as though someone had gone through the crowd and ordered the people to pull to one side. There was no policeman in sight. I walked through the open space. The Jewish girl followed me, and my husband followed her, unnoticed and unmolested by the crowd. The angel of the Lord must have hidden us from view, for that troublemaker stayed behind, still breathing out his invectives. Jesus had power over nature. He could command the wind and the waves to be still. We can't, but angels still have that power. They are constantly executing replays of the miracles of Jesus, sometimes in refreshing and unexpected variation. For when an angel says, "Freeze," fire or flood or hail, runaway horses or speeding cars, or stolen Carabao water buffalo will stop as dead still as Balaam's donkey. Jeanette Smorrison was driving down the left lane of a busy street. Ahead of her, a car was flashing its left turn signal. Hoping to avoid delay, she checked to see if the right lane was clear, then turned her wheels to enter it. That is, she tried to turn the wheels. They would not turn. They seemed to be locked. At that moment, a sports car which she had not seen came speeding by in the lane she had tried to enter. Who locked her wheels? Einar Thwerson was driving a team of 4 horses home from a wheat field. They were young and lively and eager to get home. He let them trot along. But suddenly, an open newspaper blew up onto them and they panicked. They began running as fast as they could, and he could not stop them. What could he do but pray? He had hardly begun his prayer when the horses stopped as if they had run up against a stone wall. They would not go ahead one step nor to the side. They were jumping up and down and were shaking from fright. Who stopped those horses? Was this a replay of Balaam's donkey? Samuel Llamos lives on a mountain farm in the Philippines. One night, his only water buffalo was stolen, and he was unable to find it. He could only pray and leave the matter in God's hands. At the end of 4 weeks, he was asked to go to San Carlos to identify a water buffalo. The animal recognized him immediately, ran to greet him, and began licking his hand. The man who stole the water buffalo had gone halfway to the market, Samuel learned, when suddenly the water buffalo stopped. No matter how much the man whipped the animal, it would not move. Why? Muriel Witchman and Alice Cunn were crossing the mountains when the car skidded on the ice and began spinning in wider and wider circles. Suddenly, the car was picked up and set down, dead still on the ice, just to the right of center, heading in the right direction. Who did it? But I must tell you about Dwayne Tank. His story seems to fit here, though I'm not sure why. It is hardly a simple replay of Balaam's donkey, or of the Spirit snatching away Philip, or David escaping the spear of Saul. It has overtones of all three. But this is what happened. Dwayne and his wife had attended prayer meeting in Redwood City, California one evening and were driving home, heading toward Mountain View. They had been married about 2 years at the time. In those days, the road was a 3-lane highway with the middle lane used for passing. There was little traffic that night, with only a few cars on the road. They were almost to Dinah's Shack, a restaurant, when Dwayne pulled into the middle lane, which was clear to pass another car. But suddenly, a car zipped out from behind an approaching car into the middle lane and headed right for them. The driver seemed not to see them at all. Dwayne could not possibly move into another lane because he was now even with a car on both sides. There was literally no place to go. A Red Sea situation. Maybe that's it. In just seconds, the two cars were approaching each other at 50 or 60 miles an hour and were headlight to headlight, possibly 50 feet apart. Philip was set down at Azotus. Dwayne and his wife were set down in the Dinah's Shack parking lot. That's where they were. The next thing they knew, they were just turning around in the lot. There were no skid marks. How did they get there? Did angels pick them up, car and all, and move them over the other car? Or cause the other car to disappear? Did angels make a safe lane through traffic, as at the Red Sea? Or just snatch them up and set them down? They don't know. It may be that in this case, the angels executed a triple play too fast for the understanding. The day of miracles is not past. God could even today rerun the Jonah or the Daniel chapters to save lives and strengthen the faith of his dear people. The end of chapter 9. Chapter 10. Out on a limb. How far out on a limb should faith go? How far can it go without falling straight into the arms of presumption? One of the best known instances of spiritual daring, of course, is that of George Muller and the fog. Here it is again, as remembered by the captain of the ship, whose own Christian life was revolutionized by the experience. The captain had been on the bridge for 22 hours without leaving it, when he was startled by someone tapping on his shoulder. It was George Muller. "Captain," he said, "I have come to tell you that I must be in Quebec on Saturday afternoon." This was Wednesday. The captain replied without hesitation, "It is impossible. I have never broken an engagement for 57 years. I would willingly help you. How can I? I'm helpless." "Let us go down to the chart room and pray." "I never heard such a thing, Mr. Muller. Do you know how dense this fog is?" "No," he replied. "My eye is not on the density of the fog, but on the living God, who controls every circumstance of my life." So they went to their knees, and the man of God prayed a very simple prayer. The captain muttered to himself that it might be suitable for a class of 8 or 10-year-olds. It was something like this: "O Lord, if it is consistent with thy will, please remove this fog in 5 minutes. You know the engagement you made for me in Quebec for Saturday. I believe it is your will." The captain was going to pray, but Muller put his hand on his shoulder and told him not to. He said, "First, you do not believe that he will, And second, I believe he has, and there is no need whatsoever for you to pray about it. The captain looked at him amazed, and he continued, Captain, I have known my Lord for 57 years, and there has never been a single day that I've failed to gain an audience with the king. Get up, Captain, and open the door, and you will find the fog is gone. He got up, and the fog was gone. What a faith! But more importantly, what a God! Now, George Muller was not a man who made a practice of praying for strange or unreasonable things, but in his deep conviction that God was going to work this miracle, he felt confident in laying both his faith and God's power on the line in this very open way. Surely, God would not have worked as he did if the request had been tainted with presumption. These signs shall follow them that believe, said Jesus. In my name shall they cast out devils. They shall speak with new tongues. They shall take up serpents. And if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. Mark chapter 16, verses 17 and 18. These words have often been fulfilled. More often, they have been so misunderstood as to be considered a license for showmanship. You recall how when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, there came a viper out of the heat and fastened on his hand. This is found in Acts 28 and verse 3. The island people watched for him to die, but he shook off the beast into the fire and felt no harm. But remember, Paul had not created this emergency. It was an accident. He did not pick up the viper and say, "Look what I can do." And then there's the case of Miss Annie Taylor, who entered the forbidden land of Tibet in the year 1890, working there for a time in spite of all efforts to keep her out, to put her out, and to starve her out. The people kept asking her what to do with her body if she died, and she told them she wasn't going to die right then. Finally, poison was put in the food she was invited to eat. Her suspicion was aroused almost immediately, and it was not long till she became ill with all the symptoms of aconite poisoning. She felt her strength going. Her heart was slowing. And then, through the window, she saw that a crowd was silently gathering. She realized that they had come in curiosity to watch her die. There she was, alone in a strange and hostile land. But her Lord was with her, and she remembered and claimed his promise for the sake of Tibet. Immediately, she felt the blood tingling again in her veins. Her heart became normal, and her strength returned. She took her Tibetan scripture portion and went outside to preach Jesus and his power to save those who would come to see her die. I think you see that there is one thing that stands out in all of these experiences. These servants of their Lord did not create these emergencies. What a far cry from the cheap showmanship becoming so prevalent today, with snakes deliberately handled, poison purposely imbibed, insulin stopped, medical help refused, just to show what people can do or what faith can do, or what God can do. And the Lord Jesus Christ, in whose name it is done, has nothing to do with it. It is no wonder that senseless, pitiful, unnecessary tragedies have resulted. There is a wide place for faith, even daring faith, but presumption lurks close by, and the line between is very thin. Only those who walk very close to their Lord will know where the line is. If God sees fit to bring us into a tight place so that He can demonstrate His power to get us out, that is His business. We are told that God, in His providence, brought the Hebrews into the mountain fastnesses before the Red Sea, that He might manifest His power in their deliverance. Yes, even Jesus would not place Himself unbidden in a position that would necessitate the interposition of His Father to save Him from death. He would not force providence to come to His rescue, and thus fail of giving man an example of trust and submission. He was living as we have to live, as our example. And He would not, at Satan's suggestion, tempt God presumptuously by experimenting on His providence. Shall we step out by faith? By all means. Even way out if necessary. Yes. But presumptuously experiment? Never. Not many years ago, a story filtered out from a certain Eastern European country. You understand, of course, that there is no way to check the accuracy of a story that reaches us by way of many tellings. Yet certainly, there is no reason why it could not have happened just as it is told. A Christian worker, according to this account, had been arrested and imprisoned. One day, he was taken from his cell and led into an interrogation room where a police officer and a doctor were sitting at a table. Lying open on the table was a Bible, and the prisoner was asked if he believed that book to be the Word of God. He answered that he did. Then he was asked to read Mark 16 and verse 18, and he read aloud, "And if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them." "Do you believe this part of the Bible too?" the officer demanded. And the Christian replied, "Yes." The officer then placed a filled glass on the table and said, "In this glass there is a strong poison. If the book is true, as you insist, it won't hurt you. But to show you we don't play with you, watch this." A large dog was brought in and given some of the liquid. In a very few moments, the dog was dead. "Do you still claim that this book you call God's Word is true?" "Yes, it is God's Word. It is true." Then, with the doctor looking on, the officer shouted, "Drink the entire glass." The Christian asked permission to pray first. He knelt down by the table, took the glass in his hands, and prayed for his family, that their faith might not fail. Then he prayed for the officer and for the doctor, that they too might become followers of Christ. Then he said, "Lord, you see how they have challenged you. I am ready to die, but I believe your word that nothing will happen to me. Should your plan be different, I am ready to meet you. My life is in your hands. May your will be done." Then he lifted the glass and drank it down. The doctor and the officer were amazed and not a little surprised. They hadn't expected this. They thought he would break first. Now, they watched for him to collapse. He didn't. There was complete silence. The minutes seemed like hours. Finally, the doctor made the first move. He felt the prisoner's pulse. It was normal. He continued his examination, but could find no symptoms, no evidence of harm. He couldn't hide his astonishment. At last, he slumped into his chair, paused a moment, then took his party card from his pocket, tore it in half, and threw it on the floor. Then he reached out for the Bible, took it in his hand, and held it reverently. "From today," he said with conviction, "I too will believe this book. It must be true. I am ready to believe this Christ who did this thing before my very eyes." But I must share one more experience, one that is an amazing demonstration of faith and of angel intervention. The story has special appeal because it happened not to an experienced worker for Christ, not to a great Christian leader, but to a young girl who loved her Lord and knew that He loved her. During the fearful Mau Mau incidents in Kenya, East Africa, in the 1950s, many African Christians were persecuted and tortured because of their identification with what some considered to be a foreign religion. Mau Mau leaders were trying to force all Africans to take an oath that involved obscene acts and a promise to worship the leader of the Mau Mau. Gakwi, a teenage girl who had been at our mission school only a year, determined that she would not take the oath. Her parents coaxed her, and the Mau Mau threatened her with death if she refused. And then one day, she was seized and taken to the ceremonial hut. "Will you take the oath?" they demanded. "I cannot," she replied. "I'm a Christian." They slapped her face. "Do you want to die?" And she said, "I don't want to die. And I know Jesus will save me. I know He will." At that, they beat her until she fell unconscious to the floor. Then they dragged her over to the wall because there were other young people to take the oath. Gradually, she regained consciousness and watched in horror as these youth performed filthy acts and swore the terrible oath. She prayed, "Oh God, save me, save me." And as she prayed, she felt strong hands grip her feet. She was pulled slowly but steadily through a hole in the wall. Once outside, she rose slowly to her feet, and then, unnoticed, she slipped away to the home of a Christian family, where she was hidden until the trouble was over. Government officials then examined the hut and could find no sign whatsoever of the hole through which she had been pulled. And when the officials asked her to identify her tormentors, and place charges against them, she said quietly, "No, I do not want to do that." They did not realize what they were doing. I have hope that they will be Christians someday. What a faith, as daring as that of Daniel and the three Hebrews. And what a sweet, forgiving spirit, like that of Jesus and Stephen. Heaven must have been pleased beyond measure. The end of chapter 10. Chapter 11. Sometimes I wonder. I've never seen an angel. That is, I don't know that I have. But sometimes I wonder if I gave 3 of them a ride one stormy night a long time ago. It was the night I drove from San Diego to Santa Barbara in the very worst of a Southern California flood. My daughter Judy, 2 or 3 years old, slept through most of the trip in the back seat. Most everything that could happen was happening, or so it seemed. At one point, the highway was closed, but I was told how to go around and get back on. In one town or city, I drove through 3 blocks of water so deep it was gushing around the headlights. Abandoned cars were all around me, and the old Durant I was driving stalled, but started again. I couldn't have paid for towing. I had about 75 cents, and the trip was taking twice the usual time. I pushed another car several blocks to a service station. That was no problem. So when, shortly after that, 3 men hailed me and wanted to be pushed to a station, I could see no reason to refuse, at least not in a storm like that. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning by then. This time, it was 20 miles before we came to a station that was open. 3 of those miles were through water that looked like a lake. I have no idea how those 3 men could tell where the highway was, but all I had to do was push. When we did come to a station that was open, the men filled my tank with gas. Then they asked if they could ride with me into Los Angeles. Their car's motor was wet, and they wanted to leave it at the station to dry out. This was the most providential thing that could have happened, for I did not know my way through Los Angeles even when it wasn't flooded. I had intended to go directly up the coast and bypass the city, but I had missed the sign in the storm. These 3 men knew exactly which streets were flooded and exactly how to avoid them. We didn't have to backtrack once. One got out of the car at one point, another farther on, and a third got out just a block from Wilshire Boulevard. From there, I knew my way. It didn't occur to me at the time, but in the intervening years, I have often wondered if those 3 men may have been angels. Of course, God uses men too, but still, I wonder. I must tell you about George Peace. I wrote a letter to him once, and he didn't read it the way I wrote it. I've always wondered if an angel altered it. It happened this way. I had written a song called Jesus, Take My Hand. One evening, while I was praying, I felt very definitely impressed that I should have it printed and that I should ask an aunt of mine for the money needed. This seemed very strange, for I knew my aunt had no money to spare. I asked her anyway. The impression had been so strong. And she said, "Ask George Peace. I think he would help you." George Peace an old family friend, was living in a hotel in downtown Portland. When I called the hotel, I learned he was in Seattle, and I wrote him there. Now I knew that I would need about $50 to have plates made of the song and have it printed. But this was at a time when I was not working. It was also at a time when $50 was a huge amount of money. I simply could not bring myself to ask for $50. So I asked for $25 and prayed that he would send $50. He wrote back immediately and enclosed a check for $50. He said, "You asked for $45, and the extra $5, you can send me whatever copies you think I can understand and appreciate." I asked for $45. My handwriting is not the best, but this figure was clearly written out, and there was no possible way 25 could look like 45. Did an angel change it? I don't know, but I've always wondered. Then there was the time I prayed that an angel would go into a print shop and change the color on some printing that had already been done. At least I couldn't think of any other way my problem could be solved. It was no life or death matter at all. I was having a little booklet of poems printed. It was called Tangled Threads. And an artist friend had done some borders for me that were to be printed in a very delicate tint, just atmosphere really. As I stopped by at the print shop, the borders were on the press and the run half finished. But the borders were not a delicate tint. They were just the opposite, too dark and too bold. I was heartsick. But the printer would not see it as any great calamity. I could hardly demand a rerun. And what can you do about something that is already done? Most people are sensible enough not to pray about what is already done. To use a Bible example, David prayed and wept over his baby for 7 days. And when the baby died, he stopped praying. But I wasn't David. I went home and I prayed for about 2 hours over something that was already done. And what happened? Did an angel go and change those borders? No. But the printer ran out of ink before the run was finished. He had to mix more, and it didn't match. Having differing borders across the page from each other was hardly acceptable. So he decided to do the entire run over. They were printed as I wanted them. 1,000 ways to solve our difficulties. Remember? Even when it seemed too late to pray. Experiences like that have meant a great deal to me, especially because they show that God is interested not alone in life-threatening situations, but on the seemingly insignificant things that concern us. But there were the other kind too. Angels must have been around when, at the age of 7, I had my tonsils removed in a small-town doctor's office. And the doctor said, I died. I didn't go through any dark tunnels, or see my body on the table, or anything like that. They must have been close by, angels, that is, on the day that I was walking not far from Walla Walla College, and some men across a field were shooting geese or something, and I felt the wind of a bullet just above my head. They surely were on duty on the day that I was in a serious automobile collision and escaped without a scratch. And I know they were close at hand when at the age of 17, I was miraculously healed in an answer to prayer. There was the time I didn't see an angel, but others said they did, hovering over an evening prayer band in which I was kneeling. I thought it might have been imagination. But 15 years later, I received a letter from someone whose name I did not recognize, someone who had been profoundly affected by the memory of seeing that figure of light. I must tell you one more experience. I don't know just how or if angels were involved, but it seems to me they must have been in some way. It happened in the city of Portland. I had been praying that some music plates made in Chicago would arrive in time to get the songs printed to take with me on a trip Monday morning. It came up to Sunday, the day before, and they had not arrived, though I did have word that they had been sent by express. But did you ever try to get something out of an express office on Sunday? All morning, I kept calling the main office and the branch office without results. About 1 or 2 o'clock, the branch office closed for the day, and the main office expected nothing more from Chicago. I think I was surprised more than disappointed, for I had really expected my prayer to be answered. But nothing more could be done. So Judy and I took an interturban that ran between Portland and Gladstone, where the Oregon camp meeting was in session. Just after a stop along the way, a girl came and sat down beside me. She had been dozing, she said, and then, roused by the stop, she looked around and saw me. I knew her only as Mary. She had frequently come to the office of the Quiet Hour program and helped with mailing as a volunteer. I knew nothing else about her, but she said, "There's a package for you down at the office." I had a strange feeling that someone had been looking over my shoulder all morning. "What office?" I asked, and she said, "The express office. It came in about 11 o'clock. Judy and I got off at the next stop, then walked back into Portland, got the plates, and took them to the printer, who printed the songs that night. I took them with me the next morning, with the ink still not completely dry. The remarkable thing about all this is that Mary was the only person in the world who both knew me and knew where the package was. And God put us on the same interurban. And again, I treasure this sort of experience because it shows that God is interested in everything that concerns us, whether or not it involves great danger or any threat to life. He's concerned with the little things too. I don't mean to give the impression that all the special experiences in my life, with or without angels, took place years ago. There is hardly a day that I don't feel the presence of those patient celestial beings, or see some undeniable evidence that they have been around. But you wouldn't want to read a book a foot thick, would you? And yet, it didn't seem quite right to share so many experiences from the lives of others and not to include a few pages of my own. I know, I weary the angels sometimes. I hope I haven't wearied you, but I just wanted to tell you. The end of chapter 11 of It Must Have Been an Angel.